Good afternoon, viewers on TVSCITECHTALK, YouTube, online, live. It is Monday, the 10th of December 2018, and we are going live here on TVSCITECHTALK because around the time of our time, Central European time here in the Netherlands, 4:30, that is in about 11 minutes from now, British Prime Minister Theresa May will give an indication of what is going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow was planned for the voting in the British Parliament, voting concerning the Brexit deal, and the planning for that was that it was going to be held tomorrow, Tuesday, 11th of December 2018. That would be the voting in the case of the Brexit deal, but there is enormous opposition against it in Great Britain, and we suppose, we think that she's going to announce that the voting in the British Parliament will be postponed, but it is not sure. We are waiting for her explanation, and in the meantime we will pause here on TVSCITECHTALK. Her announcement is planned for 4:30 Central European time, and then we will broadcast it here on TVSCITECHTALK online. Please be patient as we wait for her announcement.
What's she going to say?
Well, as I understand it, what she will say to MPs is on that, guess what, controversial issue of the backstop, which our viewers will be very familiar with by now, the insurance policy that the government have negotiated with the EU, which makes sure There'd be no return to a hard border on the island of Ireland if a trade deal can't be done by the end of 2020. In other words, it creates the possibility, if things go wrong in negotiations down the line, that Northern Ireland might be treated rather differently to the rest of the United Kingdom. That's what has caused such trouble. Now, what I understand is she's going to say in 10 minutes' time, I've heard people's concerns, I hear their worries, I'm going to talk again to the European Union about ways of making it completely clear that the backstop, if it happened, would be temporary and the UK wouldn't be locked in it forever. The problem is, of course, that through the course of these negotiations, that concern has been raised again and again. It's what the negotiators sweated blood and tears over trying to get. And it's not clear to me why now, if the Prime Minister basically asked for the same thing, she's going to get it this time.
Right. Well, in a moment, we'll play you a bit from Leo Varadkar, the Irish Taoiseach. But first of all, can I just show viewers this tweet from Guy Verhofstadt? He is the European Parliament's main representative, and he says, I can't follow anymore. After 2 years of negotiations, the Tory government wants to delay the vote. Just keep in mind that we will never let the Irish down. This delay will further aggravate the uncertainty for people and businesses. It's time they made up their mind. #Brexit. So, Gillian, what is she going to get that is going to substantially change the agreement that has been locked down in that withdrawal agreement on the Irish backstop?
Well, first of all, it's not unusual that negotiations go down to the wire, and they continue as well. So what's happened at the moment, if you read all the Hansard, the first 3 days of the debate, it was clear that a deal breaker potentially for a number of people was the Irish backstop. And why is it that something that's not supposed to be used, is an insurance policy, is only supposed to be temporary? Why is it people don't believe that? And I think the crux of the issue is, in Article 50 it says whatever's put in place is only supposed to be temporary, but I'm not sure everybody really trusts temporary in terms of the EU, because temporary can be an awful long time in terms of the EU. So it doesn't seem worth losing this deal for something that nobody wants to happen, that nobody thinks is permanent, and maybe it could just be explained better or described better so that people feel more comfortable that this thing, which isn't supposed to happen, if it does happen, is really not going to last a long time.
Or they just don't trust Theresa May to actually stick to that.
Who doesn't?
MPs, the Tory MPs who aren't voting for this.
Well, I guess they think it's not really. It's as it's written in the withdrawal agreement.
But why don't they believe it then? You've been out selling this deal. You and a fairly small but significant band of Tory colleagues have been defending this deal for weeks and weeks. And if anything, opposition has grown. You've lost the argument.
Honestly, I've listened to this argument so many times from different people, and actually normally what they're arguing about is not even the substance of the deal. It's either what they first believed in terms of they're arguing for the referendum position, or they're looking for something else out of it. Because even I spoke to somebody the other day who's in a Leave constituency who said, I can't possibly vote for this. I'm in a Leave constituency. I said, this is the closest to Brexit you get. Really? This is what you should be voting for. No logic.
But here's the thing, Gillian Keane, that's exactly what the Prime Minister was saying, and yet she's delayed the vote. So until this morning, all through the last 10 days, the Prime Minister's been saying, just as you have, this is the best deal, and this is it. And then today she says, oh, actually, it might not be it. I'm going to go back to Brussels. So how do you think your colleagues will see any more credibility in what she's saying today as what she said last week?
There's only two things that could happen. Either you go back to Brussels before the vote, or you lose the vote and go back to Brussels. There's only two things that can happen, right? That backstop is not well explained enough for people to feel comfortable with, particularly the DUP. So if it's not explained well enough, and yet it's supposed to be temporary and it's never supposed to happen, then that needs addressing.
Are you prepared to listen to this and have the backstop explained more clearly? Will that make you back the vote, John?
It's not a question of communications, it's a question of the content of the backstop, which simply doesn't work. And we know that there's been repeated assurances by the government, by the Prime Minister, that there will be no border either on the island itself or in the sea between ourselves and the Northern Ireland. What this agreement does, effectively, it makes us subject in Northern Ireland to a separate set of rules to the rest of the country. And that is an absolute assurance which was given by the Prime Minister and by the Good Friday Agreement. So this is not a question of communication, it's a question of a fundamental flaw in the proposal itself.
All right, well, let's have a look at what the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has tweeted. So, at Jeremy Corbyn, she says, if Labour, as official opposition, lodges motion of no confidence in this incompetent government tomorrow, the SNP will support and we can then work together to give people the chance to stop Brexit in another vote. This shambles can't go on. How about it, John?
Look, I think in any part of the whole of our parliamentary history, the government would have already fallen because it can't even get its own finance bill through. That was always a question of a vote of confidence. The government would have fallen. The government has failed to govern. Now, the question about the current regime is we have this new damned act of Parliament, which means you only get one shot. A vote of confidence, or vote of no confidence, and I think we are just watching carefully what she says at 3:30 and what happens in the next few hours, and then we will make our decision as to our parliamentary tactics.
But you said you would call a vote of no confidence in the government. You've just said that the substance is completely wrong and you can't support it. Nicola Sturgeon is reaching out for you. Your members want you to do this. So do your MPs. Why don't you call a vote of no confidence in this government?
I think we need to be sure that if we only get one chance a year, your viewers may not know this, to do a motion of no confidence, we want to do it when the maximum leverage applies. And I don't know that it's this afternoon, certainly, but we're not going to, in any event, announce our policy in TV studios such as this.
No, more's the pity. But I mean, is that because?
Disappointment, John Trickett.
But that's because they can't win. They can't win a vote of no confidence.
I mean, the risk for Labour, of course, is if they push to a no confidence vote in the Prime Minister, that might be the only thing that you would unite the Conservative benches behind her. So it is an unpredictable course of action from them. I have to say, though, inside the Labour Party, there is a lot of frustration that leadership hasn't sort of been more proactive on this. There's a sense, and you know, notwithstanding also their range of opinion, shall I say, diplomatically inside the party on whether or not they should be straightforwardly pushing for another referendum. But I can just tell you, Joe, I've just got a bit more information about what we think the Prime Minister is going to say. I've been told that she's going to say she will see her counterparts in other member states before the Brussels summit on Thursday. That is what I'm told she's going to suggest. And also she will look for new ways of empowering the House of Commons to ensure that there's democratic legitimacy about the backstop. Now, eagle-eyed viewers might remember at the end of last week, an amendment was put forward that would have given MPs a bit more of a say, allegedly some kind of parliamentary lock, a vote on the way in and a vote on the way out of the backstop. But in all these things, it comes down to what's in the text. This is a quandary about a legal text, a withdrawal treaty that will become a binding law, and enough sort of political flummery around the sides might not be enough to do it. And there are some Tory MPs I've talked to in the last few hours who've sort of said it doesn't really matter what she says, in a sense, unless she ditches the backstop altogether, which she's just not going to do at this stage. She may never have the numbers to get this through. Well,
let's have a look at Arlene Foster, who has tweeted on exactly what you've been talking about. She is the DUP leader. Just finished a call with the Prime Minister. My message was clear. The backstop must go. Too much time has been wasted. Need a better deal. Disappointed it's taken so long for the Prime Minister to listen. These are your confidence and supply partners, Gillian, when it comes to passing key bits of legislation. They're not going to sign up to anything less than ditching the backstop. So what do you do?
You have to try and renegotiate. You know, when it gets down to the final deal-breaking issues, you have to lock yourself in a room and see whether it is worth doing something different or facing the inevitable loss of this deal in Parliament. And that is where this has always been the case. The Prime Minister needs to walk everybody up to the edge of the cliff, including the EU. They all need to look over it, and then they have to do the right thing. There is no reason why, logically, you would ever let this agreement not be put in place because of the badly worded lack of comfort that this thing couldn't go on forever. You just wouldn't let it happen in the commercial world. Well, I mean, that wouldn't happen at all.
But we were told that there was no other deal available.
Well, they're still saying that.
We were told that the EU wouldn't change anything either. And there's over the weekend, Theresa May has 13 separate times said that there will be a vote tomorrow evening, a meaningful vote. She's now abandoned that. How can our negotiating partners trust a person who makes those pledges to the nation and then breaks them within hours?
How do Tory MPs trust somebody who's done that, who's marched everybody to the top of the hill? She said there wouldn't be a snap election. Then there was a snap election. She said there would be a meaningful vote tomorrow, and now it is being delayed, and she's called people to the Commons. We can see everybody gathering there in the chamber, obviously waiting with bated breath to hear what she has to say. Her authority has drained away.
These are such unprecedented times that people keep trying to compare it to other times in government. There is nothing to compare this to. This is the... and, you know, whoever it is that has to do this, nothing's going to change.
We're going to have to go straight into the chamber to hear what the Prime Minister has to say.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, I'd like to make a statement on exiting the European Union. We've now had 3 days of debate on the withdrawal agreement, setting out the terms of our departure from the EU and the political declaration setting out our future relationship after we have left. I've listened very carefully to what has been said in this chamber and out of it. To what has been said in this chamber and out of it by members from all sides. From listening to those views, it is clear that while there is broad support for many of the key aspects of the deal, on one issue, the Northern Ireland backstop, there remains widespread and deep concern. As a result, if we went ahead and held the vote tomorrow, the deal would be rejected by a significant margin. We will therefore defer the vote scheduled for tomorrow and not proceed to divide the House at this time. I set out in my speech opening the debate last week the reasons why the backstop is a necessary guarantee to the people of Northern Ireland, and why, whatever future relationship you want, there is no deal available that does not include the backstop. Behind all those arguments are some inescapable facts. The fact that Northern Ireland shares a land border with another sovereign state. The fact that the hard-won peace that has been built in Northern Ireland over the last 2 decades has been built around a seamless border. And the fact that Brexit will create a wholly new situation. On the 30th of March, the Northern Ireland border will for the first time become the external frontier of the European Union's single market and customs union. The challenge this poses must be met, not with rhetoric, but with real and workable solutions. Businesses operate across that border. People live their lives crossing and recrossing it every day. I've been there and spoken to some of those people. They do not want their everyday lives to change as a result of the decision we have taken. They do not want a return to our hard border. And if this House cares about preserving our union, it must listen to those people, because our union will only endure with their consent. We had hoped that the changes we've secured to the backstop would reassure members that we could never be trapped in it indefinitely. I hope the House will forgive me if I take a moment to remind it of those changes. The customs element of the backstop is now UK-wide. It no longer splits our country into 2 customs territories. This also means that the backstop is now an uncomfortable arrangement for the EU, so they won't want it to come into use or persist for long if it does. Both sides are now legally committed to using best endeavours to have our new relationship in place before the end of the implementation period, ensuring the backstop is never used. If our new relationship isn't ready, we can now choose to extend the implementation period, further reducing the likelihood of the backstop coming into use. If the backstop ever does come into use, we now don't have to get the new relationship in place to get out of it. Alternative arrangements that make use of technology could be put in place instead. The treaty is now clear that the backstop can only ever be temporary, and there is now a termination clause. But I am clear, from what I have heard in this place and from my own conversations, that these elements do not offer a sufficient number of colleagues the reassurance that they need. I spoke to a number of EU leaders over the weekend, and in advance of the European Council, I will go to see my counterparts in other member states and the leadership of the Council and the Commission. I will discuss with them the clear concerns that this House has expressed. We are also looking closely at new ways of empowering the House of Commons to ensure that any provision for a backstop has democratic legitimacy and to enable the House to place its own obligations on the government, to ensure that the backstop cannot be in place indefinitely. Mr. Speaker, having spent the best part of 2 years poring over the detail of Brexit, listening to the public's ambitions and, yes, their fears too, and testing the limits of what the other side is prepared to accept, I'm in absolutely no doubt that this deal is the right one. It honours the result of the referendum.
Order. The remainder of the statement must be heard, and I invite the House to hear it with courtesy. And for the avoidance of doubt and also the benefit of those attending to our proceedings who are not members of the House, I emphasise that, as per usual, I will call everyone who wants to question the Prime Minister. But meanwhile, please hear her, the Prime Minister.
It honours the result of the referendum, it protects jobs, security and our union, but it also represents the very best deal that is actually negotiable with the EU. I believe in it, as do many members of this House, and I still believe there is a majority to be won in this House in support of it if I can secure additional reassurance on the question of the backstop. And that is what my focus will be in the days ahead. But, Mr. Speaker, if you take a step back, it is clear that this House faces a much more fundamental question. Does this House want to deliver Brexit? And a clear message from the SNP, but if the House does it want to do so through reaching an agreement with the EU? If the answer is yes, and I believe that is the answer of the majority of this House, then we all have to ask ourselves whether we're prepared to make a compromise, because there will be no enduring and successful Brexit without some compromise on both sides of the debate. Many of the most controversial aspects of this deal, including the backstop, are simply inescapable facts of having a negotiated Brexit. Those members who continue to disagree need to shoulder the responsibility of advocating an alternative solution that can be delivered, and do so without ducking its implications. So if you want a second referendum to overturn the result of the first, be honest that this risks dividing the country again. Be honest that this risks dividing the country again, when as a House we should be striving to bring it back together. If you want to remain part of the single market and the customs union, be open that this would require free movement, rule-taking across the economy, and ongoing financial contributions, none of which are, in my view, compatible with the result of the referendum. If you want to leave without a deal, be upfront that in the short term this would cause significant economic damage to parts of our country who can least afford to bear the burden. I do not believe that any of those courses of action command a majority in this House. But notwithstanding that fact, for as long as we fail to agree a deal, the risk of an accidental no deal increases. So the government will step up its work in preparation for that potential outcome, and the Cabinet will hold further discussions on it this week. The vast majority of us, Mr. Speaker, accept the result of the referendum and want to leave with a deal. We have a responsibility to discharge. If we will the ends, we must also will the means. And I know that members across the House appreciate how important that responsibility is. And I'm very grateful to all members on this side of the House, and a few on the other side too, who've backed this deal and spoken up for it. Many others I know have been wrestling with their consciences, particularly over the question of the backstop, seized of the need to face up to the challenge posed by the Irish border, but genuinely concerned about the consequences. I have listened, I have heard those concerns, and I will now do everything I possibly can to secure further assurances. If I may conclude, Mr. Speaker, on a personal note, on the morning after the referendum 2.5 years ago, I knew that we had witnessed a defining moment for our democracy. Places that didn't get a lot of attention at elections and which did not get much coverage on the news were making their voices heard and saying that they wanted things to change. I knew in that moment that Parliament had to deliver for them. But of course, that doesn't just mean delivering Brexit. It means working across all areas, building a stronger economy, improving public services, tackling social injustices, to make this a country that truly works for everyone.
The Prime Minister must be heard. The Prime Minister.
Tackling social injustices, to make this a country that truly works for everyone, a country where nowhere and nobody is left behind. And these matters are too important to be afterthoughts in our politics. They deserve to be at the centre of our thinking. But that can only happen if we get Brexit done and get it done right. And even though I voted Remain, from the moment I took up the responsibility of being Prime Minister of this great country, I've known that my duty is to honour the result of that vote. And I've been just as determined to protect the jobs that put food on the tables of working families and the security partnerships that keep each one of us safe. And that's what this deal does. It gives us control of our borders, our money and our laws. It protects jobs, security and our union. It is the right deal for Britain. I am determined to do all I can to secure the reassurances this House requires, to get this deal over the line and deliver for the British people. And I commend this statement to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for a copy of the statement before we met here this afternoon. We're in an extremely serious and unprecedented situation. The government has lost control of events and is in complete disarray. Yes. It's been evident for weeks that the Prime Minister's deal did not have the confidence of this House. That's right. Yet she ploughed on regardless, reiterating this is the only deal available. Can she be clear with the House? Is she seeking changes to the deal or mere reassurances? Does she therefore accept the statement from the European Commission at lunchtime saying that it was the only deal possible, we will not renegotiate, our position has not changed? Ireland's Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, has said it is not possible to renegotiate the Irish border backstop, stating that it was the Prime Minister's own red lines that made the backstop necessary. Exactly. So can the Prime Minister be clear? Is she now ready to drop further red lines in order to make progress? Yeah. Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister confirm that the deal presented to this House is not off the table, but will be represented with a few assurances? Bringing back the same botched deal either next week or in January, and can she be clear on the timing, will not change its fundamental flaws and deeply held objections right across this House, which go far wider than the backstop alone. Exactly. Mr. Speaker, this is a bad deal for Britain, a bad deal for our economy, and a bad deal for our democracy. Our country deserves better than this. Yeah. The deal damages our economy, and it isn't just the opposition saying that. The government's own analysis shows this deal would make us worse off. Yeah. If the Prime Minister cannot be clear that she can and will renegotiate a deal, then she must make way. Yes. And Mr. Speaker, if she is going back to Brussels, then she needs to build a consensus in this House. And since it appears business has changed for the next 2 days, it seems not only possible but necessary that this House debates the negotiating mandate that the Prime Minister takes to Brussels. Exactly. There is no point at all in this Prime Minister bringing back the same deal again, which clearly does not support is not supported by this House. Yep. Mr. Speaker, we've endured 2 years of shambolic negotiations. Yes. Red lines which have been boldly announced, then cast aside. Yep. We're now on our third Brexit secretary, and it appears each one of them has been excluded from these vital negotiations. We were promised a precise and substantive document and got a vague 26-page wish list, and they become the first government ever in British history to be held in contempt of Parliament. The government is in disarray. Uncertainty is building for business. People are in despair at the state of these failed negotiations and concerned about what it means about their jobs, their livelihood and their communities. And the fault for that lies solely at the door of this shambolic government. The Prime Minister is trying to buy herself one last chance to save this deal. If she doesn't take on board the fundamental changes required, then she must make way for those who can.
I hope I can respond fairly briefly to the Right Honourable Gentleman. The Right Honourable Gentleman appeared to argue, on one hand, that it wasn't possible to change the deal because the EU had said this was the only deal, and on the other hand, that the only thing he would accept was the deal being renegotiated. No, the Right Honourable Gentleman quoted the European Union as saying this was the only deal, and then goes on to say that the whole deal needs to be renegotiated. This is the fundamental question that members of this House have to ask themselves is whether they wish to deliver Brexit and honour the result of the referendum. If you wish to all the analysis shows that if you wish to deliver Brexit, if you wish to honour the result of the referendum, then the deal that does that best protects jobs and our economy, is the deal that is on the government has put forward. That
everybody will have his or her chance, but the questions have been put and the answers must similarly be heard. The Prime Minister.
That is the fundamental question for members of this House. To deliver on and honour the result of the referendum, but to do it in a way that protects jobs and our economy, and that is what this deal does. The Right Honourable Gentleman talks about a number of issues. He wants to be in the customs union such that free movement would have to, and the single market and free movement would have to be accepted. He refuses to accept that any deal requires a backstop, because that's our commitment to the people of Northern Ireland. He claims he wants to negotiate trade deals, yet wants to be in the customs union, fully in the customs union, that will not enable us to negotiate those trade deals. And finally, he says about uncertainty for British business. I can tell the Right Honourable Gentleman that the biggest uncertainty for British business lies not in this deal, but on the front bench of the Labour Party.
Order.
So Theresa May has given her statement to the House. She presses on and confirms what we already knew, that the vote that was going to be held tomorrow, the meaningful vote on her Brexit deal, is being postponed. It is being deferred. Now, she said that she has heard the concerns, and she couldn't fail to have heard the concerns of her colleagues, her Tory MPs, and she is going to go back to the European Council, which she was scheduled to do so anyway on Thursday, and see her counterparts in other member states and the leadership of the Council and the European Commission, and discuss with them the clear concerns over this Irish backstop with them. But she has talked talked in the language of reassurances, and she explained and set out again that a backstop, an insurance policy in with the withdrawal agreement, is absolutely necessary. With us is Sam Coates from The Times. What did you think of that statement?
Well, it's quite clear today is something of a landmark day in the Brexit process. For 2.5 years, this government has been working towards a Brexit plan due to be put to the House of Commons tomorrow. And in the face of opposition from more than 100 Conservative MPs and all of the opposition parties, Theresa May has had to pull it. However, she spent a large part of the statement in which she pulled the vote tomorrow defending the agreement that she has just struck. She says that the statement, that her Brexit plan has broad support in many key areas, and she goes on remarkably to defend the backstop, to say to her own side as much as anybody else that the backstop is in any deal that the UK strikes with the EU as part of its divorce settlement. Now, if you think that that is going to assuage large numbers of people, I'm not sure that's right. She has effectively promised to go back and talk to Brussels again. However, in this speech, she clearly put a ceiling, a limit on the amount of ambition that she is going to seek. She is looking in some way to provide some kind of democratic lock or other way of convincing people that one day we can come out of this backstop, this temporary arrangement to protect the Northern Ireland border. And pretty much that is it. She might not even get that, but it is clear now that this is going to drag on to the other side of Christmas. There is a sort of hard deadline of January the 21st set down in legislation, before which she's got to make her mind up, and Europe have got to make up their minds up about what, if anything, they're going to give her. But she has limited the scale of what she's going to go for. Even that is going to be very difficult. I think her future will be determined in some ways in the statements that will be going on now and over the next 2 hours, when we see whether any Brexiteers are willing to put their objections on hold and wait and see what she brings back, or they're going to press on with the level of harsh criticism which could end up in a leadership contest before the end of the week.
Let's go straight back into the Commons. John Bercow, the Speaker.
Take place tomorrow without fail, wish to rise to the occasion. Mr. Kenneth Clarke.
Mr. Speaker, on the question of Europe, this House is not just divided into parties, it's divided into factions. And it becomes clear that at the moment there is no predictable majority for any single course of action going forward. Would my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, agree that no other governments are going to start negotiations with us on any new arrangement, whilst the British continue to explore what exactly it is they can get a parliamentary majority to agree to? Furthermore, we are strictly bound, quite rightly, to the Good Friday Agreement and the issue of a permanently open border in Ireland. So does she agree that it's particularly folly for a large faction in this House to continue for an argument that we should insist to the other governments that the British will have a unilateral right to declare an end to that open border at a time of their choosing, which is why the backstop remains inevitable?
Can I say to my right honourable and learned friend that I certainly agree. I think none of the alternative arrangements that have been floated and suggested in this House actually would command a majority of this House. But he's also right that we retain our absolute commitment to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and to the commitments with it that the United Kingdom government made within that agreement, and any agreement which was being negotiated with the European Union, be that either of the other two options that are normally quoted, the Norway option of some form or the Canada option of some form, would require negotiation, could risk the possibility of there being a period of time when that relationship was not in place, and therefore would indeed require a backstop.
Kirsty Blackman.
Theresa May, they're responding to a question by the Tory grandee and Europhile Ken Clarke. We went into the chamber, actually, Gillian John, to hear John Bercow, the Speaker, laying out some of the methods by which this vote can be deferred, the vote that we were expecting tomorrow, and also expressing some dissatisfaction that that is what the government has chosen to do, which can hardly be a surprise, Gillian.
Well, I guess not. But, you know, if you look at the first 3 days of the debate, and I actually took home the 3 Hansards and read through them at the weekend, it's clear that most people have come down, if they're unhappy with the deal, to not actually the backstop, the fact it exists, the fact that they fear they cannot get out of it. And that is the problem that needs to be solved. And as I've said to you, something that's never supposed to happen, that in Article 50 says has to be temporary, for that to be misunderstood or there not be any trust over how that really could make sure you can get out of the backstop, it really shouldn't be that hard to get more clarification on that.
Is she the wrong messenger? Is that the problem?
No, I think it's incredibly difficult for people to, you know, the what ifs here. If we don't get a deal, where's the risk, who's bearing the risk? And particularly in Northern Ireland, that's an incredibly difficult situation. She's been told very clearly, this is it, a backstop applies to any negotiated deal. However, every time you get to the end of a negotiation, people will say, you know, this is it. Sometimes you need to push one more time.
Right, well, Jeremy Corbyn, in his response, John Trickett, says she will have to make way, Theresa May, if she comes back with the same deal, essentially the same deal, even if there are some more reassurances written into the political declaration, if not the withdrawal agreement, the divorce agreement. How will you make that happen?
Well, first of all, look, let's see what she is going to do. But it looked
to me,
it looked to me as though she was making the case for the deal, which cannot go through the House of Commons. And it seemed to me there was no clarity at all in anything that she said, which indicated that in any way she resiles from the proposal. Look, for your viewers to understand this, it's clear that any temporary arrangement, transitional or otherwise, which envisages no land border with the European Union in Ireland, requires a solution to the customs problem.
Right.
And her solution is that Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland should have the common customs arrangement and the rest of the Britain shouldn't. Now that is a breach of the fundamental principle of consent in the Good Friday Agreement.
Right.
Well, no, it doesn't actually work like that. It's on about 4% of the regulations, particularly around agri-goods and products, which they have to, you're right, keep the same rules as Europe, and we could diverge from.
Right, so they're being treated differently, aren't they? And that is what they object to, the DUP.
That's what they object to, the fact we could diverge, and if we did diverge, and of course the longer this backstop goes on, the more chance there is of divergence happening, which is also another key thing, that they can't analyse the risk if it's going to go on for 10 years, let's say.
All right, well, you say you want her to make way, you want to see a general election. Yep. Again, how do you make that happen?
Well, as I've just said to you beforehand, it's very difficult because of the Fixed Term Parliament Act, but it's not impossible. The first thing is, let's see what happens in the next few hours. I think this initiative today is going to founder within moments, because she's not proposing really any fundamental restructuring of the deal, and the European Union won't allow it. I think her time in office is coming rapidly to an end.
All right. Alison McGovern, who is the Labour MP who supports another referendum, is in central lobby. She will have listened to that statement. What was your reaction, first of all, Alison?
This is a mess. This is an absolute mess. John Trickett is right. It's hard to see how this is going to work. You can't, you know, she's asking people to compromise who never in their political lives have compromised. And right from the very start, Theresa May, in a hung parliament, either needed to say to members from other parties, let's work on this together, or she was always going to find herself in this mess. As she hasn't been prepared to work across parties, then inevitably, either, as John Trickett just said, you know, we're in the difficult situation of needing a general election, but how do you get one with the Fixed Term Parliament Act? What are the other ways out of this situation? The conclusion I and many others come to is the only way out of this is to give the public the final say.
And would you like the Labour Party now, at this point, you've said it's a mess, John Trickett says she has to go, is this the time the Labour Party must call for a second referendum?
Well, our party policy, agreed at our conference right across the Labour movement, was that we judge the deal by our tests, which we have done, that we wanted a general election, which we do, but if we don't get one, we think that the public should have the final say. That's what unions and members are saying. So the question is, how on earth do we get out of this mess in the next few hours? But in the end, I think more and more of the public see Brexit as a distraction and think that they themselves should have the final say over this mess.
John?
Well, look, Alison's just correctly said that we are reserving the possibility and maybe even the probability of a referendum in due course. Bear in mind, It takes months and months and months to organise a referendum. That's laid down in the law of the land. It would take probably 7 months, we think, probably right into the summer before you can have a referendum. In the meantime, we're going to be exiting the European Union in March. And so that is a big problem. The second thing about a referendum, it will not change the composition of the House of Commons, which is now in gridlock. So if you ask me what do you prefer and why, we prefer a general election.
Sure.
Have a conversation with the public and renew the mandate and see whether a new House of Commons can resolve this problem.
Do you agree with the Prime Minister that a second referendum risks dividing the country?
A referendum clearly is always a binary choice, and at the end of it you have a group of people, and it's half and half, who feels deeply unhappy. So
why are you backing it then as an option?
Because it may be that is the only option which is available to break the gridlock. But clearly the best way of breaking the gridlock is to change the government and change the House of Commons. Now, you are right to say, the implication of your question is, it's very hard to see how an election can be organised under the present regime. But let's see what happens in the next few days. My prediction is she will not survive long.
Because?
Because she has failed, in my view, to convince either the country or the Parliament that her solution is going to work.
All right, Alison, what do you say, listening to John Trickett? He sounds reluctant about the idea of a second referendum. Let me put it like that.
John and I agree that there's no good options here. You know, every option that we might go for is beset by risks on all sides. And, you know, the last referendum, you know, we had the most terrible event and the most horrific loss of our colleague Jo Cox. So, you know, nobody underestimates any of the risks to any of these options. But the fact is, the country has to find a way out of this mess. And that's why, as John said, and I would say, the Labour Party policy is right. Judge the deal on its merits and keep all options on the table.
Right, but they will say Alison McGovern, of course, wants to stop Brexit, would like to remain in the EU. You're uncomfortable with this idea, aren't you, going back to the people?
I'm uncomfortable with the idea that the country is offered either a choice between status quo, no change on the one hand, or a deal which doesn't work on the other. And that, if there was a referendum tomorrow, would be the choice. But the country is absolutely desperate for change. And so we have to find a way, if there's going to be a referendum, that we offer change and not just the same old, or else a deal which won't work.
All right, Alison, thank you very much. Just briefly, what would be on the ballot paper for you? You must have discussed it.
No, we're not going to get into discussing what's going to be on the ballot paper when we've no idea how things are going to... Of course it's an option, but we don't know. If you can tell me when... what will happen next, then I can probably answer your question, but I don't think any of us know because we're in completely new territory.
But would Remain be on there?
It may be, but we'll have to see with the discussion which takes place. We prefer a general election for the reasons I've given.
All right, let's listen to John Bercow, the Speaker. As I said earlier, he was laying out some of the options that are available for deferring this vote. Here he is.
Any courteous, respectful and mature environment allowing the House to have a say, its say, on this matter would be the right and, dare I say it, the obvious course to take. Let us see if those who have assured this House and the public over and over and over again that this supremely important vote is going to take place tomorrow without fail wish to rise to the occasion.
He's not happy about it, is he, Sam?
No. In some senses, I think the Speaker shares the frustration of all of us who went through the weekend watching Cabinet Minister after Cabinet Minister reassure us that there was no chance of the vote being pulled. Spare a thought for Michael Gove this morning, sent out by Number 10 to say there's no chance of this being pulled. Number 10 spokesman saying the same at 11:30. It's gone. It's over. Look, unfortunately for the government, there is a procedural kind of roadblock here. There does have to be some kind of way of voting through the idea that you're not going to have a vote before tomorrow. But otherwise, the ordinary course of things, that debate would start, and ministers would have to essentially talk out the debate to avoid it going down the division lobbies. All of this is incredibly embarrassing. Theresa May has spent 2.5 years working up to this point. Government seems to be having a Wile E. Coyote moment. It's gone off the edge of the cliff. The legs are still spinning, but we have absolutely no idea what's happening next, whether or not her plan is enough, whether or not the letters are going to go into Graham Brady, the chair of the 1922, whether Labour is going to put down a motion of no confidence in the government or in her, and what is going to happen next. It is a moment, perhaps, of the greatest uncertainty that we've seen, I don't know, in my in my lifetime.
Well, on that moment of uncertainty, let's be certain and go to speak to Nigel Evans, the Conservative MP in Central Lobby. Nigel, are you pleased the vote's been deferred?
Yeah, it's what my association called for on Saturday. We had over 70 members in the Clitheroe Conservative Club, and they said defer their vote because it was going to go to defeat, go back to Brussels and renegotiate the backstop. If that can be done, then I think that would be the best possibility for getting the withdrawal agreement through Parliament.
And if she comes back with only very minor changes, bearing in mind we've heard from the EU, we've heard Leo Varadkar, the Irish Taoiseach, saying there is no reopening of the withdrawal agreement as regards, well, anything actually, but as regards the Irish backstop.
Yeah, that's not much of a negotiation, is it? If the European Commission say no and then we cave in, then it becomes terribly one-sided. The Prime Minister has no room for flexibility. If a miracle happened and she got the withdrawal agreement through Parliament unamended, then we lose the support of the DUP. Now, we need them to ensure that we govern for the next 3 years. So the political reality is simply that she needs to renegotiate. And it's not just reassurances we want off them. It's not reassurances that the backstop is only going to be temporary or we don't want to use it. It's got to be taken out of a legal document. Otherwise, we are going to be on the back foot time and time again. And of course, we'll lose a DUP. That is not a happy situation to be in. But all right. You had Alison McGovern on just a moment ago.
I did.
And what she is not prepared to say is that some people within her own party will do anything that they can to undermine not just this agreement, but also to prevent Brexit from happening. And what you've got in there is a Remain Parliament. That is part of the problem. And it's an ugly scene when the politicians take on the people. It's the 17.4 million people that Theresa needs to listen to.
Well, Gillian would tell you to back the deal. I mean, you're listening to Nigel. He's not going to until that backstop is gone.
Well, if you read what most people said in the speeches, it was actually being able to get out of the backstop as opposed to it going altogether. If it has to go altogether, that makes it more difficult. But, you know, she's gone back to negotiate on this point. It isn't unusual. I mean, I've done 30 years of commercial negotiation. It is not unusual to get to this point, by the way, it always goes up to Christmas Eve, and actually get people round the table to say this is the only thing that needs.
But
this
Nigel
shifts the deal.
But Nigel, you're not going to accept anything less than the backstop going?
Well, no, what needs to happen is that Northern Ireland needs to be treated like the rest of the United Kingdom. The rest of Great Britain, I mean. So that's clearly the case, otherwise we are not able to govern. So you've got to do that. And then, yes, the next bit is that we need to be able to unilaterally leave the backstop when we like. At the moment, we can leave the European Union. But once this agreement becomes law, only the European Union can allow us to leave. That is clearly intolerable. We voted to take back control, not to give it to the European Union.
All right, well, in order for that to happen, and you're talking about negotiation, what cards has she got to play?
The EU want this deal to go through as much as we do. A WTO, World Trade Organization rules in place either side of that border as of the end of March in 2019 is not good for either side, for any businesses at all. Any problems that happen here, any scare stories you've seen on the newspapers here will be 100% mirrored the other side of the borders. It is clear nobody wants to have a chaotic, disorderly Brexit, and it would be irresponsible to do so.
Right, Nigel,
both sides need to agree.
Nigel, you're risking that chaotic, disorderly Brexit.
No, I'm not.
The EU.
Well, the European Union are risking it.
Well, but so are you, says Gillian.
But the Irish Taoiseach says that he's not going to put a hard border in. Northern Ireland aren't going to put a hard border in, and the United Kingdom aren't going to put a hard border in. Who's going to put the hard border in?
Listen, Nigel, I'm just hearing that the pound is now at its lowest level against the dollar since April. What do you say?
Well, the fact is that they clearly are reacting to some news, but the reality is that in the best interests of the United Kingdom is that the European Union and the United Kingdom get together and they compromise. And we're already compromising. Don't forget, Joe, they're going to get £39 billion during the implementation period. That takes us up to the end of 2020. That's a significant sum of money. They need that. We should be talking about trade at exactly the same time as giving the money. Do you know, if we get an FTA with the European Union, all this talk about the backstop and the hard borders may not be necessary at all, because we get a deal so The Germans are able to sell us their cars, the Dutch are able to sell us their plants and flowers, the Spanish, the Prosecco, the French, the champagne. My goodness me, £95 billion pound deficit
we'll
we
be
have with the
popping the
European
corks
Union.
The way you've described it, Nigel, at this rate.
I owe you a bottle of champagne, Joe, I told you.
Animated as ever. But are these worrying markets, worrying voters, or is it Project Fear, Sam?
Well, look, I think, to be blunt, we could either have had the pound dropping today, when she pulled the vote, or the pound dropping tomorrow, when she was defeated in the vote. In fact, I suspect the pound would have dropped something more than it has done today if we saw a 100-plus majority. I'm not even sure that traders are that good readers of the political scene. What should worry them, though, is what Nigel just said. I would predict that, given what Theresa May said, and then given how Nigel Evans responded, there is no way he is going to be satisfied, given the ceiling she put on the kinds of concessions that she wants from Brussels. And I can't see any way that she isn't going to get rid of the backstop. He's never going to be happy. Right,
and he's nodding in agreement there. Let's hear from another Nigel Dodds. We spoke to him earlier today. He is the leader of the DUP in Westminster. Let's hear his response.
Frankly, what the Prime Minister says today simply isn't credible, is it? I mean, this is an impossible position for the government to find itself in. The Prime Minister says she's listening, but she talks about reassurances and assurances. Does she not get it by now that the withdrawal agreement, legally binding text, is unacceptable to this House?
Right, well, he says it's unacceptable to him, certainly, and to this House. Nigel Evans, they've talked about 48 letters going in constantly, some of your Conservative colleagues from the European Research Group, to trigger a vote of no confidence in Theresa May. Is that any closer? Do you know letters that have gone in today?
Well, I had one MP tell me that he was putting a letter in today, but I think he told me that 3 weeks ago as well. So, Joe, only Graham Brady really knows. But Nigel Dodds has just hit the nail on the head. It's unacceptable to the DUP. We cannot govern without them. And so the reassurances or assurances simply are not going to be enough. It's a legal document. And Sam's right, I'm not going to vote for it whilst it's still part of the treaty.
All right, you're not going to vote for it. Are you going to put in a letter of no confidence in Theresa May?
I'm not, because I'm Joint Secretary to the 1922. I will be one of the people administering any vote of confidence or indeed a leadership election. I think it's totally inappropriate for me and the other 5 officers, therefore, to comment on that.
Do you think she's going to last the week?
I really don't know. I mean, it has been said that this is a very interesting time in politics. It's normally, high drama at Westminster. I've got to tell you, I've been a member of Parliament for 26 years, and I've not seen anything like this since the Maastricht debate, when John Major called a vote of confidence in himself.
Will she last?
I really do not know.
Oh, not you, Nigel. I'm so sorry, Sam.
That's the question. Whether it's the Conservatives through letters or Parliament through motions of no confidence, that's what we're all going to be looking at for the whole of the rest of this week.
All right, there's continued coverage on BBC News, obviously, of the statement and the debate that is going on in the House of Commons now. From all of us here, goodbye.